Hello and welcome back to the Endgame class. My name is Caleb Denby, and today I'm going to be taking you through some endgames, some famous, some I made up, between knights and bishops. We're going to see the classic knight versus bishop kind of endgame, see when it's good for the knight, when it's good for the bishop, and what you really need to do in order to win these positions. So first up here is a position that I just invented. This isn't from a real game, but this is a classic case of a bishop against a knight. So first off, of course, who is better in this endgame? The question we must always ask ourselves. Obviously, it looks as though this knight is better than this bishop, but white does have the benefit of having more g-pawns than his opponent. White with the extra g-pawn is just up a pawn, so I wanted to ask you guys at home, who is better? Who is better? What do you guys think? Starting off with the questions early for you tonight. Who is better, white or black? A cool Vector says white. Your knight is meaningless. I have more pawns. Fair enough. Black, closed positions. White, Tristan has seen this before. I think I have gone over this one in an in-person lecture, but it has not made it to the internet. Wanted to introduce it because I felt like this lecture was good enough to go online. Looks like a draw, says Manny. White, white, white. Everybody wants to be white here. So how do you go about evaluating a position like this? It's not so easy to figure out. One method is to just look at the position statically like this, say, okay, white has a pawn, black has a better knight, who do I want to be? I want to have more pawns. You can do that. That's not a very good way of evaluating the position. Looks like a draw is another thing you can say. Maybe the knight balances out the pawn, but the way to think about this is to, once again, come up with plans for both sides, come up with winning plans that you can try and enact. So for white, what does winning this game look like? If you claim white is better, then you have to come up with some way for white to win this game. So those of you in the chat who said white is better, now people are switching to say black, but if you did say white was better, if you want to make that claim, then you absolutely have to come up with some plan for trying to win this game. So I'll ask you guys at home what you can come up with for white to try to win if black does nothing. In fact, I'll go as far as to say, for the next 5 moves, I'll play king g8, king h7, king g8, king h7. So let's see if you can come up with a winning plan against black doing absolutely nothing. That's kind of the first way you can figure it out. A cool Vector can't come up with a plan. Can't come up with a plan. There is actually a plan here for white to very much greatly improve his position that black is going to have to look out for if he's not careful. I want my bishop on e1. Okay, so granted. Wish granted. What's the next step? Maneuver the bishop to g1. Okay, now that is a feat that I don't know if you can really pull off here. Okay, king f1. I'll even give you this. I'll even give you this. What's your winning plan? King f1, e2, f3. Okay, what's your winning plan? What's your winning plan? I'm giving you guys a lot here. Walk the king all the way to the e6 pawn, and that is something I will not give you. If you start running to this queen side, you have to be ready to meet my king over there. All right, you're not getting in over there. Can't give you that much. So there, Chung J. Keat, I think, has already said it before, and Jim now has the answer as well as Matthew Tomlinson. The move g4 is a playable move for white, and this may not even be a winning plan if black just ignores it. You can play the move g5, but you have to be a little bit cautious. I can even just kind of come out here. And it's not so easy to win this game, even still. But this move g4, g5 definitely vastly improves white's position. If white gets this, then black is always going to have to be tied down to kind of defending this pawn. So that's one thing to definitely have to look out for in this position. So now let's flip the table a little bit. As black, crazy, right? How do you win this game, right? I think most of the chat now agrees that black is a bit better, because even if we give white all the time in the world, all the time to play g4 and even g5, I still don't think it's going to be winning there. So as black, what do you want to do to try to win this game? Also, thank you to Pamela for the $2. Thank you very much. Very kind. How can you win this position with black? Just for example, let's say bishop c1 was white's move. So it is black to move now. King to b4. Okay. King to g4. Okay. I'm with it. I'm with it. Come with the king to d3. All right, we're getting more and more ambitious with the king moves here. King h6, h5, g4. Okay. All right, these are ideas. These are ideas. I love it. I love it. Knight to c4. Okay. Get king to g4. So these are some pretty good ideas here. So this is how you can logically come up with a winning plan. You know, in an ideal, I'm kind of making fun with my huge arrows, but in an ideal world, right, your king is on d3, right, or even like f3, right? But the question is, can you actually make that happen in this position? That's the question you kind of have to ask yourself here. Is that something that you can make happen? Can you get a king to d3 from this position? And so let's try it out. What do you think would happen? So let's say king g6, king f1, just for example. And then if you continue over, let's say king e2. Continue over. What do you think white's going to do here? What do you think white's going to do? Let's try to get all the way to b4. Who has a move here for white? Got a little bit of bedhead going on. That's not good. It's too late at night for bedhead. Disaster. If king e2, then knight takes g3. All right, you guys might be trying to lose here. Knights are worth a lot. Ah, okay. So I can't take this guy because of this. So you could take off my pawn. And I guess I would have to come here. Interesting. Guess that makes my life a little bit harder, right? A little bit harder. So you've got me there. So can we come up with a better drawing strategy than white? Because otherwise, let's say bishop here, and we proceed as you suggested. If white does nothing, well then all of a sudden, you're going to get what you wanted, right? You're going to get what you wanted here. You're going to get in. And once you get in, are you actually winning here? The answer is yes, yes you are. You can even come here, and all of a sudden, it becomes very, very awkward for you. In fact, this is checkmate. So, pretty good stuff. And of course, if this bishop moves out of the way, you take this guy, and then this guy is going to fall before too long as well. So we have to come up with some way that we think our opponent is going to stop us from getting to b4. So let's try and come up with that here. What is white going to do? Let's say white starts with bishop a3, for example. So what is white going to do to prevent us from invading on the queen side? What is white going to do to prevent black from invading on the queen's side? This is the question. King f3 for white? Well, we ran into this problem, right? We ran into this problem here where king f1, king e2, all of a sudden you get met with knight takes g3. And this is not so comfortable anymore. Not so comfortable for white, losing your pawn like this. Can't take because of push. So what is white going to do to prevent us from coming to this queen side? Bishop b4 to e1. I don't think that quite does it. Don't think that quite does it. Actually, I guess that might do it here. That might do it here. So let's say bishop b4, bishop e1. We come over, he comes over. King d6, king up, king over. Now all of a sudden, with this bishop on e1, perhaps white has time to play this move, king f3, and all of a sudden, your foray into the queen side is not going to work. So now we have to come up with some way to prevent this from happening with black. And, of course, I just scrolled a little bit too fast and revealed the answer. So, of course, the idea here for black is, yes, in order to win this game, you need to get your king over to the queen side. But in order to do that, you first have to make sure that this white king isn't going to get any ideas, any funny ideas of getting active. So what you want to do here is you want to first place your knight on the optimal square of g4, as a lot of people in the chat were saying, though they were not answering my questions, so no points awarded to you. So, of course, the move here, if white goes for something like this, is that eventually we're going to switch ideas and come to g4, and all of a sudden having this bishop on e1 doesn't help you at all. With that in mind, white can play even more, what's the word? Even more, I don't know. White can try even harder than bishop b4, bishop e1. So how can white try and still defend this position? In fact, there is but one way for white to, in fact, manage to draw this game after the move king g6. Or is it a trick? Maybe I meant to scroll fast. Maybe. Maybe. So yeah, it is this move, bishop e7. The idea being, if you don't let this knight get to g4, then you don't have to spend all your time defending all these pawns. And so things do still get a little bit awkward for white if this business ends up happening with knight takes g3, king f2, knight e4 check, king g2. But this might just be enough to hold with this white king, keeping this guy boxed out. And if you try to switch sides now, white might just be in time to stop you from invading. So, okay, definitely an interesting position here. As to why can't white or black invade on this side of the board, well, exactly the reason I just showed you. You get caught here on the f3 square, and simply no entrance for you once you get to this square. You do have this idea, but that's pretty much all you get here. You don't get anything else. Okay. So because of this funny idea of bishop e7 restricting the knight, now if we try to come all the way over to the queen side, once again, this bishop defends this square and stops knight f6, and so we would run into this problem of g4 coming on the board again. This is why, after bishop a3, there is in fact only one winning move for black, and that is to play knight f6 immediately when after bishop e7, knight g4. And now, big trouble for white here, because both of these pawns are attacked at the same time, and no comfortable way to defend them. So after knight f6, if white tries to stubbornly defend with bishop c1 and starts repeating, of course, this is now our opportunity to bring the king all the way over now that both of our opponent's pieces are completely stuck. And from here, it's just going to be totally busted for white in every conceivable endgame. So that was the introduction to the lecture here. I know we spent a while on this, but there were a lot of things to kind of take into account here, and I wanted to walk you guys pretty slowly, kind of the thinking process you should approach in an endgame like this. First, you want to, determine if you're playing for a win or a draw. So I asked you, first off, who's better here, white or black? Who should be playing for a win? And we came up with black because there's simply no winning plan for white here. There's no way to try and generate a winning plan. So we know black is trying to win. So if we know black is trying to win, we have to come up with a winning plan for black. And you guys came up with a few ideas. We see the king trying to invade this way, and we see the king trying to invade this way. And that is how you can kind of win positions like this. You can't do it with the knight alone in almost every case. You do need an invasion for the king. So that's kind of the step we skipped over that you guys all kind of already understood. You need to invade with the king in order to win these positions. So in our ideal world, we just play king b4 and up to d3, and then we win the game. So the next step of the thinking process is finding ways for your opponent to try and combat this. And this was the part that went by pretty slowly because everybody just already wanted to play knight f6 to g4 because it looks natural, but it's important to understand how you get there. So how can white try and prevent us from getting to b4? Well, he can try this by bringing his king out and playing g4. So we had to come up with ways to prevent this. So that's how eventually we arrived at this best defensive try for white of bringing this bishop to h4 and then playing king f3. And then we realized the best way to stop that with black is to plant the knight on g4 immediately, and then the white pieces are tied down. So that is the thinking process I wanted to take you guys through as we evaluate this end game here. Now, sometimes, players can just rely on their intuition and find the best move here. Like, yeah, obviously I want to play knight f6 because it, attacks both these pawns, and that's really bad for white. But it's important to understand how you get there for cases where this is less obvious. So the thinking process, once again, determining if you're playing for a win, trying to find a winning plan, and then finding how your opponent is going to try to stop you, and then finding out how you can stop your opponent from trying to stop you, right? That's the process you can kind of follow for endgames like these. So with that in mind, now we are equipped with our process. Let's take a look at another pretty simple one here. We have kind of the script flipped here, where white is now the one with the better minor piece. We see a better bishop against a rather unfortunate knight here. So how should we try to win this position? This one's not too difficult. Not too difficult. There's a very simple phrase that most players rely on in endgames like these. And if you know this phrase, then you probably know the winning plan. How do you find the best move for white? Finding a defense seems hard, or at least non-obvious. Well, I don't have all the answers here, unfortunately. You do just have to find ways to create potential problems for the opponent, or try and find ways that your opponent can create potential problems for you. In that specific last case, it kind of makes sense that white would try to use this extra g-pawn to create problems for the opponent, because white simply didn't have a lot else going for him. And so you naturally see, okay, white tries to use the g-pawn, but he really can't because of this knight g4 idea. And then you say, well, what if he tries to stop knight g4? And then you realize, well, I should just play knight g4 immediately. So yeah, everybody knows. Okay, they thought of a different phrase. Push 'em, baby, is Yasser Seirawan's phrase. Passed pawns must be pushed is the more general term for it. And that's exactly the winning plan here for white. You try and push this passed pawn, this pawn that cannot be stopped by another pawn, and then you force your opponent into defending it. So let's start with that and see kind of naturally where we end up here. We see a4, and let's say knight d5 by the opponent, trying to get the knight over to the queen side as quickly as possible. Continue with a5, now knight e7, and even a6 is perfectly fine to push. Sorry, excuse me, to push. Now we have knight c6. Another perfectly natural move here is to attack the knight, and now we see knight a7. And so this was kind of the obvious part of the endgame. You want to push this pawn up to a6, but now black has successfully blockaded your pawn, and I wanted to ask you, how can you try to break through here? How do you win this endgame with white? What is our winning attempt? Bring the king up. So that's safe to say. So if we bring the king up, we're going to get to a blocked off spot here on c5. So let's say you bring the king to c5, and black brings the king to c7. Now, we could put that on the board, but I want to get you guys to the point where you can kind of think ahead, realize that that's the position you're going to get to, and then try and figure out what you're going to do from there. Because it's well and good to put the king on c5 and the king on c7, but what are you hoping to achieve by doing this? What are you hoping to achieve? So there's a couple ideas going around. A couple ideas going around. Cause trouble on the king's side seems to be the general idea here. So that is definitely something you want to keep in mind. Now, it's very important that you're careful about how you go about doing that, though. Because if you're not careful, then, of course, black is the one with more pawns on the king's side, so it's not so easy to just push your pawns and have nothing come of it. If black gets his own passed pawn on the king's side and manages to trade off one or two other pawns, then all of a sudden it could become very difficult to win, with black having his own counterplay on the king's side. So, of course, as always in these minor piece endgames, the way to try to win is to try to bring the king in. You need your king to be able to invade. In this case, you can't just directly kick this knight off of a7 because black meets you on c7, but from there you use kind of the concept of Zugzwang in order to force your opponent to give you something, right? You know, black may be able to hold this knight on a7, or he may be able to stop your king from invading on the king's side, but it's very difficult for black to be able to do both of those things at the same time. And that's why this endgame is winning for white. So let's go ahead and put this on the board now, because this is very natural to include. Okay, even king d6 is playable here, but, you know, eventually the king's going to have to come back. So let's just say we get this position, right? So now, a lot of ideas were actually being thrown around here. So let's say the move knight c8 gets played, and we do actually go for these things like g4 and g5, right? If you start playing things like this, trying to, you know, cause trouble on the king's side, as it was phrased, you might run into some slight awkwardness here. For example, if the move f6 is played, you do have to start being a little bit careful about these pawns on the king's side. For example, if you take here, all of a sudden g takes f6, and I'm not even convinced that white is winning anymore. If you play the move g6, it also can become a little bit more complex as well. Moves like knight c8 can come on the board. Maybe black wants to switch ideas and go after these kingside pawns. And the point is, you do just have to be a little bit careful about what you're doing on the king's side. Luckily for white, there is a very easy way to kind of avoid all these complications and just kind of immediately win the game here. So see if you can find how to put the opponent into Zugzwang in this position. There's a very, very simple win here for white. I say very simple. I don't mean it's very, very easy to find, but it is a short sequence, and once you do see it, it is very clearly winning for white. Okay, there's actually a lot of ideas being tossed around here. So one seems to be bishop d1 to a4, I think with the idea of coming all the way back to e8. And yeah, okay, this looks pretty reasonable. Black will probably have to play f6 and e5, and you might even win this e5 pawn, which is good. It's not the idea that I was looking for, though. The move bishop b7 has also been suggested, but black is just going to pass with the move knight a7, so I don't see the idea there just yet. If you go to h5 first, then f7, well, even the move g6 is going to be playable for black. It's not the prettiest move, but g6, then you can follow it with f6 and even go for a move like g5. This is one of those things It might actually be starting to give black some hopes over here on the king side of simplifying just a little bit. I'm not saying it works, but I'm saying you're starting to give practical chances. Bishop e7 puts black in Zugzwang after knight a7. So this is kind of the idea. It's difficult to kind of communicate it with the chat, but bishop c7. The point is, black of course cannot allow this move. Bishop takes c8 to come on the board. So here he would have to pass with some move like knight a7. And the point now for white is that black no longer has any passing moves. If this king moves back, now suddenly our king invades on the king's side. If the king moves back the other way, we can invade over here on the queen's side as well. And as such, there is no good way for black to hold this position. White only needs to pass with some move like g4, and maybe black can pass as well for a while. But the fact is, white can actually just waste time with this bishop here. And at the end of the day, black is going to have to keep making pawn moves. And you're going to run out of pawn moves at some point here if we keep doing this dance. Eventually, black's going to have to go for something like e5, when you can even just take, and bring the king over to this king side to win the game. So it was this idea of Zugzwang that I wanted to introduce to you guys. Knights are notoriously bad blockaders of rook pawns, in this case the a pawn, and as such, white can actually just guard all of the potential squares for this knight, put the opponent into Zugzwang, and win this game. There were other ideas, but I think this is really the simplest way to win this endgame with white. So once again, the point of this endgame was that in order to win, you need to invade with your king. And so all of these minor piece endgames are going to be about finding ways to invade with the king. Now, next, I wanted to introduce a very, very famous endgame that was played between one Anatoly Karpov and one Garry Kasparov. This is an endgame from Moscow, 1984, when they played. And in this position, Karpov had the white pieces and was pressuring Garry Kasparov in this game. I don't remember all the details surrounding this game. I just remember this endgame is very, very famous. So here, white plays this move b4, which is a perfectly good move. It solidifies the situation on the queen side, making sure that black cannot play moves like a5 and b4 at a later date, just solidifying things over there. And then black played g takes h4. So I wanted you guys to evaluate this endgame, see what you guys can come up with here for white in this position. I will tell you that white is going to be the one playing for win. You probably guessed by the little 1 sitting next to Anatoly Karpov's name in this specific endgame. But I wanted to ask you guys, how can Karpov try to win? Try to come up with a winning plan. Stop pawns on h file first. g4, g4, g4. Everybody wants to play the move g4. Knight f5 check, knight takes h4. Ah, I've caught you guys here. Knight f5 check is a losing plan. That is a losing plan. Don't forget, bishops move backwards. Take h4 first and then think. Take h4 first and then think. Try and come up with a winning plan from this position. Try. Just try. I want you to try. g4. g4 is right or wrong. You guys tell me. King will invade if g4. Very bold claims. Very bold claims. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, as they say. So g4, how is your king invading? I absolutely just do not see what line you guys are thinking of here. None of these things are winning plans. You guys are suggesting very single moves. I want a winning plan from you guys. Come on. So first and foremost, hopefully you guys can answer this question. What is always going to be the winning plan in these endgames in one form or another? Of course, the winning plan is going to be invading with the king. So when I ask you to find a winning plan, you should be looking for ways to invade with the white king. And this is how you should be determining what you should be doing here. So moves like g4, if they're with the purpose of trying to invade with the king, then well done. But unfortunately, you do need to think a little bit deeper than that. You can't just say g4 and then the king invades, because I really don't see what you guys are talking about. Okay, chat's moving fast now. Hold on, let me catch up here. Let me catch up here on what you guys are saying. It's tough. Okay, g4, h takes, knight f5, I assume, instead of f4. Bishop f5, g f5, and then king up and around. So to put that one on the board really quickly, looks like, well, first of all, I guess black passes here in this line. We wanted to do this and then come all the way around here. Unfortunately, you do get caught, and you don't quite get to totally invade here. Note that black only has to guard these two squares, and other than that, the position is totally locked. So this king and pawn endgame does not have the answers you seek, unfortunately. So that is not a successful way to invade with the king. So first, king g2, king h3. So the point is, which a lot of you guys are saying now, you came up with this plan of playing king g2 to king h3 and trying to invade along the h file. And that, in fact, is going to be the correct plan here. The point was the move that you guys were mostly avoiding. I think a lot of you were avoiding it because I paused in this position, and so it's probably not the natural recapture. But the move to avoid is actually going to be g takes h4 here. This was Karpov's big idea in trying to win this endgame. If you play the move g takes h4, all of a sudden this h4 square is permanently taken away from your king. And so as such, it's going to be very difficult now to invade with the king, to come up with a winning plan. Because this square is blocked, this square is blocked, these squares are blocked. There's absolutely no invading on the queen side. And so that leaves the f5 square. That's the only square kind of in this big mega fortress here that is left open for white to try to invade through. And quite simply, it's not going to happen. You know, black will just pass for all of eternity as soon as you try to come in here, while the move king e6 is perfectly fine. And this square is not going to fall to your hands. Black will pass and pass and pass to his heart's content, and there's not much you can really achieve here. You can even perhaps try and go for something like this, but once again, if your knight can land there, that's well and good, but your king is never going to invade, and so you are not going to win this endgame. So that is the big reason why Karpov does not take on h4 here. As for the specifics, king g2 to h3 is not so bad, but Karpov actually found a better way to reorganize the pieces. This knight on e3 is good, but gosh, wouldn't it be better on f4, where it guards all of these wonderful, juicy squares and makes life very difficult for black. So rather than king g2 and then taking on g3 as such, he plays this move, knight g2. And this move is just a little bit slightly better, spends a little bit less time to get what he wanted to achieve here. So some of you I know did say knight g2, but I just wanted to introduce to you guys this idea of not taking on h4. This move, knight g2, is actually why this endgame is famous, because it's not an intuitive move at all, but it is the move that Karpov played, and it's very logical, right? To win this game, you need to be able to invade with the king, and so Karpov leaves his options open on this h-file at the cost of the pawn for the moment in order to give himself winning chances here. Kasparov responded with h takes g3, king takes g3 now, and now king e6. Okay, so king e6 has an obvious downside that Kasparov didn't miss, but Kasparov chose to go for anyways. So, of course, what's the best move here? Well, it's going to be the move that Karpov prepped with the move knight g2. He wants knight f4 check, trying to drive this king away and attacking both pawns at the same time. Now, Kasparov plays this move king f5. Now, I wanted to ask you, which pawn should you take? Which pawn should you take here? This is a very, very important decision. Which pawn to take? Who won in 84-85? Gosh, you're really calling on my chess history here. I think this is the one that they just like gave up on. They just gave up on this thing because nobody was winning chess games. Is that true? I don't know. Karpov won. Never mind. Karpov won. You caught me. They didn't give up on this one. That was a different one. D5, D5, H-pawn, H5, H5, D, D5. Center, D5, passed pawn, D5, 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 D5. The H-pawn, intuitively, question mark. Is it intuitive if you have to ask yourself? I wonder. Take Harry, H5, D5, H-pawn. Otherwise, black king invades. Not sure if that's true. Not sure if the black king invades if you take the D-pawn. So the idea is very, very, very deep here. And while some of you may guess the correct move, and some of you may have very logical reasons to find the correct move, it's honestly just like so far above my head that I will be so impressed if you guys actually get it. So, in fact here, you should take the H-pawn. The H-pawn is the pawn that you want to take. And I'm going to explain why you shouldn't take the D-pawn later on in this game, because it's going to be a lot more obvious later on. But let's say if we take on D5, this king doesn't really get to invade any special way. The move H4 doesn't really do anything because this pawn, this knight does defend the F4 square for the moment. And so, quite simply, black would have to, pass a little bit with something like bishop D3. And then you can play a move like knight E3 check, king E6, and king H4. And you get a lot of the same stuff that you would have otherwise. But instead, Karpov takes this H-pawn instead. Now, if we look at a very, very similar line to what would have happened if knight takes D5, we start to see kind of a key difference here in the variations. So if we took on D5 and black played king E6, we give this check, king D6, and knight takes H5, all of a sudden, black gets to come forward a little bit and take on D4. Now, this specific line I think is losing for black, but black can do things a little bit more cleverly by passing for a little bit with something like bishop D3. And if we start coming this way, we see this guy drop off the board. Wait a second. I can do better. Let's say king back to E6, king up to H5, takes king up to G6, and now all of a sudden, life is not so bad for black after all. And the reason for this is by not having this pawn on D5, it's true that we invaded with our king, but black is the one who has counter chances now. Black is also threatening to invade because this pawn isn't on D5. So black's counterplay comes through so much faster without this pawn on the board. This is one of those cases where black is actually quite happy that you took his D5 pawn off the board, because it gives him this ability to kind of fight back here in the center, rather than just allow white all this free play. So Karpov, being the mastermind that he is, leaves the D5 pawn on the board for this reason. This pawn just ends up being in black's way, and that's what allows white to try and win this endgame. This idea of leaving the pawn on the board to restrict the black king. King E6 was played in the game. Now knight F4 check, king D6, king G4, bishop C2, king H5, and the best way of defending for black is what Kasparov found. This king invading over here does leave this F3 pawn behind, so Kasparov takes the time out of his day to come pick up this pawn. King E7 first, and now knight takes D5 comes on the board. And here, believe it or not, Kasparov might have had a chance to try and draw. So I wanted to ask you guys if you could find the best move here for white. Knight takes D5, potentially actually going to be a small inaccuracy by Karpov here. So see if you can find the best move for white. And I'll give you a hint. I've already explained to you some ideas that could lead you to find this best move here. I've explained some ideas that could help you out in finding the best move here. Knight D3, king F5, going after a pawn. So knight takes d5, the idea is very much to go after this a pawn. And we'll see something like this happens in the game. But that is not going to be the best idea here for white. So someone in the chat does have it. A couple people in the chat do have it. And the fact is, the same question that I asked you guys here as to which pawn you should take and why you shouldn't take the d pawn, this actually does apply later in the game right here. In fact, white is better off leaving this d pawn on the board because it restricts the black king. So the main thing we want to do with knight d5 is get rid of this f6 pawn, right? So the best way to do it is actually to play knight h5, not capturing this pawn on d5, as counterintuitive as this looks. Now, after a move like bishop takes f3, we have knight takes on f6, bishop g4, king g5, and let's say black just passes for the rest of the game here. In fact, we'll actually pass like this to try and keep this king out. Now, the good news for white is that this position is going to be a lot easier to win now that we've already taken off the f6 pawn. Now we are kind of in the clear to take off the d5 pawn, and after a move like knight c3, it's a lot easier to try and win this position, I think. Although, wait a second, I'm confusing my notes again. Okay, maybe we don't take on d5 just yet, but if we do some clever rerouting like this, for example, king e6, now all of a sudden knight e5, bishop e4, knight c6, and we can go after this a pawn, once again leaving this d5 pawn on the board so that the black king cannot get active. This is the idea kind of for white, leaving d5 on the board so the black king cannot activate through the d5 square. And it turns out this was actually the best way to play. In the game, Karpov chooses knight takes d5 instead, the downside being this king now does have access to the d5 square, but fortunately for him, it did work out. King e6 was played, knight c7 check, and now the move, king d7. It turns out king d6 was actually the one that was called for here. And the reason for that is, you know, not so obviously apparent at first, but let's see what happens after king d7. Maybe it'll show us the answer as to why king d6 is better. Now, simply knight takes a6, bishop takes f3, king takes f6, and the king comes to d6 anyways. And d6 just being a better square, trying to get this king active, but the fact is, here it's just a little bit too late. If we compare the same line, after king d6, knight takes a6, king takes f3, king takes f6. In this case, things are ever so slightly different, because with this king already on d6, we stop this king coming from e5, and we can now play this move, king d5, check, take, knight takes b5, and come over. And with our king so close to these pawns, this one is actually just going to be a draw. You can draw any way you like. The fact is, the bishop's going to sacrifice itself for the final pawn. So this key moment here, king d7 versus king d6, turns out king d6 was the one that Kasparov needed. Likely, he was worried about the move knight e8, when after king d5, you do lose to the move knight takes f6 with the passed pawn, but after knight e8, the funny move, king e7 is the way to go, when after takes and takes. Black is actually holding on in this position as well. So, the key reason Karpov couldn't take off this d5 pawn is because that allows the black king to get active. Instead, though, he kind of fell for it. Kasparov, though, plays king d7, not taking his chance to draw the game. Now, knight takes a6, bishop takes f3, king takes f6, and this one is going to be technically winning for Karpov. King d6 gets played, still going after this d5 square. Now king f5, king d5, and king f4 is just barely in time for Karpov, taking advantage of the unfortunate placement of this bishop. And now after bishop h1, we have king e3. And Karpov manages to guard this pawn just in time. King c4 now, knight c5, bishop c6, knight d3, knight e5 check. Just a little bit of funny maneuvering here. Note that if you do come to b3, the problem is going to be that you get boxed out here on this a file. And with the king boxed out, now white is simply going to be winning. If you start passing, I will one step at a time escort this pawn up the board with my knight. So can't go that way, which is why in the game knight e5, king c3 was played, avoiding getting boxed out. Now knight g6, king c4, knight e7, trying to guard this square, bishop b7, trying to pass, but now knight f5 is unfortunate for black. Bishop back to g2, now knight d6 check, king b3, knight takes b5, and 3 pawns is enough. King a4, knight d6, and Kasparov threw in the towel here and resigned. So this is one of the most famous endgames of all time. A lot of really fun stuff to look at here. Really, really complicated stuff. Let's go through it one more time at these 2 key moments I really wanted to highlight. This moment right here is one of the craziest kind of endgame moments in all of chess that I think have appeared at such a high level. The fact that knight h5 is a better move than taking the free pawn on d5 with check is kind of mind-boggling here. But the idea is quite simple. You just don't want to allow this king to get active, to get to this d5 square. Instead, though, we saw a little bit of an accurate play from both of these players. Totally understandable in this crazy endgame, and Karpov did end up winning. Also, a key moment, this moment right here with knight g2. Knight g2, the killer move by Karpov, knowing that in order to win the game, he needs this winning plan of invading with the king, and to do that, we need access to this h4 square. Really instructive stuff. So once again, the point of this lecture, to win these endgames, you need to find a winning plan. To find a winning plan, you need to invade with the king, and so you need to allow yourself that kind of opportunity. All right, we have a little bit of time left here, so I am going to treat you guys to one more. This time, let's take a look at, let's see, what do I want here? What do I want here? Let's go with the pure bishop versus knight once again here. Here we have a game between Boris Spassky and the one and only Robert James Fischer. This was a game played in Santa Monica in 1966. Excuse me, sorry. And this is one that we have with another knight versus bishop. So this one is a lot less obvious to see who is better, if anybody is at all, and practically who has the winning chances. So I'll ask you guys at home to try and come up with a winning plan for really either side here. Or if you can't find a winning plan and you think it's just a simple draw, that's also a fair answer to the question. So what do you guys think about this endgame here? Whose move is it? I'm sorry, it is black to move. Black to move. Important distinction. And you know what? Since we're looking from the white side, knight c4 was played in the game. Doesn't really change the valuation of the position. So knight c4, played by Robert James Fischer. Your name is Boris Spassky. You have to figure out who is better, if there are any winning plans in the position for either player. Apologies. Bishop d5, dominate the knight. Would have been good if it was white's turn, but now bishop d5, much worse, now that black has been able to play a move. Put the bishop on d5 and push the kingside pawns is the plan for white. Yes, Bradley, you are now Boris Spassky. Best of luck to you. King e2. Okay, these are not winning plans. I'm looking for a more general idea here. I liked the answer that said push the pawns on the king's side. That's an idea. That's a general idea. That's the way to answer this question. Any other plans? Any other ideas? Central king for white. Take advantage that the bishop plays on both sides. John Joe Walsh says black's hopes are on his passed c-pawn. White is trying to block it and make a passed pawn on the king's side with the majority. So you guys have a lot of good ideas here. So a lot of you pointed out that white has this kingside majority with these pawns on g4 and h5. You also pointed out that black has this passed c-pawn kind of in return for it. There was one really great statement that was made kind of as an afterthought, I think, in one of these chat messages, and that is the fact the bishop is a long-range piece, and so you should try and take advantage of this. And that's going to be the key to this endgame. Boris is going to try to use this bishop to, yes, work with his kingside pawns, make a passed pawn on the king side, and use that to try to win the game. But he's also going to use this bishop to influence the queen side at the same time as well. And this is the inherent advantage of the bishop over the knight. The bishop is a long-range piece, can influence both sides of the board at the same time, and that's something that the knight simply lacks. Knights also notoriously bad at stopping passed pawns, particularly rook pawns, as we noticed in one of those first examples here. So it is, in fact, going to be white in this position that has all of the winning chances, because the bishop is simply better than the knight in this case. The bishop very calmly stops this c-pawn by controlling the c2 square or even the c4 square if need be. In the meantime, black's going to have a slightly harder time dealing with these pawns on the king side. That being said, the objective evaluation of this position may actually just be a draw. In fact, I very much think it is just an objective draw here. But that's less important than who has the practical winning chances. And in this case, it is going to be white with the practical winning chances because of this bishop, because this bishop can influence both sides of the board. So let's see what Spassky does to try and make use of this bishop against Bobby Fischer here. So king e2 was the first move played in the game. Like someone said, you want to centralize your king. Knight e5, now king up to e3. King up to e6, f6 was played. King f4, knight back to f7. So Bobby brings this knight all the way back here and tries to influence the king side of the board just a little bit. Spassky played king e3, which is offering perhaps a one-move repetition with the move knight e5. Of course, he probably wouldn't go for more than the one move. And then Bobby gets a little bit anxious, plays the move g5. So of course, how should white respond to this? You don't want to trade pawns when you're trying to win. So here, white should play the move h5. And in fact, now white is going to be significantly better after the things that kind of just took place. I will briefly mention the best kind of plan for Bobby to just equalize was going to be to play king h6 here, which is a pretty counterintuitive move. You can kind of continue by bringing this king up the board, be met with this, and then here, after king h6, you can play this move g5, and this is kind of the drawing try for black. You get rid of this h-pawn, or force a trade of the g-pawn for the h-pawn. White could play g3, but simply takes on h4 should likely be good enough for black. And with this extra pawn off the board, it's much, much easier to try and draw this with black. In fact, king h5 might immediately already be picking up this pawn. So this was the equalizing try. But after a few moves, we see g5, now h5 is possible with this king on f6 instead. And now Bobby is kind of in for a long defensive struggle here. Knight h6 played in the game, and now after knight h6, white is quite simply totally winning. We don't have a lot of time left in the lecture, so I'm just going to show you guys how Spassky did it. King d3 was played in the game, king e5 for black, and now bishop a8. Bishop, a long-range piece, you want to get it out of the way of this black king making any threats, so all the way on a8, it gets tucked away. And now we see how strong this bishop really is. It's guarding all of these important squares against black. In fact, it's also guarding this g2 pawn. If black gets any funny ideas, tries to go this way, something like king g4, next thing you know, this bishop comes back in a flash and immediately challenges this king's try over here. And while you may eventually end up winning this pawn here on h5, you've committed a little bit too hard to this side of the board, and now this a pawn is going to run. So just some ideas there. So bishop a8, black tried king d6, trying to defend, king c4, g4 now, and a4, a5 is nice by white. Note, black is just relegated to passing at this point, with this king stuck to the c-pawn, this knight stuck to this h-pawn. Now bishop e4, we see g3, putting the pawn on a dark square. Now king b5, knight g8, bishop back to b1, switching diagonals, knight h6, and now king a6. And after king c6, bishop a2 is a nice move by white here, not taking this pawn on a7 just yet, making sure his pieces are placed perfectly with bishop on c4. And here, I believe, Bobby Fischer resigned. King takes a7 is unstoppable, and now the king does not even get to invade. Shows you the power of the long-range bishop, turning what seemingly is a pretty equal position into a one endgame, almost like magic. All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed this endgame lecture. That's going to be it for me here on the YouTube channel tonight. If you are watching live, be sure to head over to the Twitch channel where I will be analyzing some viewer games in the class Analyze Your Games. If you're watching the video, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I had a blast showing you these endgames. Hopefully you learned something. Once again, my name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time.